One of the jokes in my craft trad is that we've really just like deviously lured unsuspecting people into a yarn braiding pyramid scheme under the auspices of witchcraft. We braid seasonal witches' ladders at the solstices and equinoxes. We braid triple braided red cords at the dedication ceremony, which we call adoption. We add to that triple braided white and black cords that then get braided together with the red cord at the first degree initiation, which we call the rite of raising. And then there are like spell ladders and meditational cords that might get braided along the way for particular people at particular points for their magical workings. I've been in ladder braiding craft since my early 20s, and I am now very officially in my late 40s, which means that I've picked up some tips and tricks along the way, which I will share with you. Welcome to Blade and Broom, your favorite witchy aunt's cottage tea shop where we're always talking about witchcraft and magic. I am Lorelei Black, and I am so glad you're here. Thank you so much for all the ways that you support the channel and my work, including liking, subscribing, and commenting here on the channel, and checking out the links that are in the description box below for my other projects and resources that are mentioned in today's video. You are fantastic humans. So cord magic, string magic, knot magic, rope and feathers, witches' ladders, witches' rosaries, these are all related terms that you may hear for a set of practices. I did a video a couple of years ago about 5 ways to use witches' ladders, but today we're going to talk a little bit about the how to make witches' ladders. And this is the part of the video where I give the disclaimer that there is more than one way to make witches' ladders. There's a lot more than one way, in fact. I am simply sharing with you my favorite way. It is tested, it is true, it is simple. Well, as simple as 3 strands of 3-yard long string can be. If you're interested in checking out some other possibilities, either to extend or expand your practice of working with making witches' ladders, then I highly recommend a book by my friend Brandy Williams called Cord Magic. The link is in the description box below. So step number 1, choose your materials based on your desired outcome or purpose. I'm a pretty firm believer in using natural materials whenever possible in your magic, and I understand sometimes cost is a consideration, but if you can, for cord magic, use cotton, wool, silk, flax, leather, sinew. Those are all going to be great. They're going to have a great effect. And there may be reasons why you would want to choose one of those types over another. If you're making spell cords or spell ladders, then I recommend using pearl cotton, which is thin and easy to work with. And it's in the embroidery floss family, but it's not quite as tangly as its cousin, actual like embroidery floss like you use for cross stitch or certain other kinds of embroidery projects. Embroidery floss you can like pull apart into multiple threads, and pearl cotton is one thicker thread. Or cotton yarn like this, which is quite thin compared to its woolly cousins. For more wearable type cords, like initiation cords or the rope and feathers that I recommend for protection work in certain types of spirit work, almost any kind of yarn will work well. And it can be anywhere from thinner, like cotton yarn, to a nice, thick, fluffy wool yarn. You can also make your own threads and ribbons by cutting or ripping woven fabrics like silk and cotton and linen. And in fact, that's what's done to make this beautiful silk sari ribbon. Tip number 2, 3 times 3, so mote it be. Maybe that should have been tip number 3. Oh well. I pretty much always have 3s worked into like the base construction of my ladders. So there'll be 3 threads or 3 shanks of thread. Sometimes those threads or those yarns are all in the same color. Sometimes they're not. It just depends on the working. Each strand is 3 yards long. Ish. I'll get to the ish in a minute. A yard itself is 3 feet. So 3 yards in 3 strands, you get these 3, 3, 3. And in the case of full-on initiation cords, you have 3 red braids that have been braided together, 3 white braids that have been braided together, and 3 black braids that have been braided together. And then the whole lot is braided together. And we call these triple cords in my tradition. For a seasonal ladder or a spell ladder, though, I'm usually just using 3 individual strands of pearl cotton that are about 3 yards or 3 meters long. Tip number 3, I don't fuss with a measuring tape. This is where that ish comes in, that 3-ish yards long. In the distant past, most traditional units of measurement were based on some part of the body. A foot, for example. The length of the arm. Or they were based on something else that was observable in the natural world, like the length of a grain of barley. It is a common folkloric practice to take one's measure, or at least it's not an uncommon folkloric practice to take one's measure. And we see this in things like initiation rituals, and it's, as I understand it, it is part of the Gardnerian Wiccan initiation ritual, although I could be wrong about that because I am not an initiated Gardnerian. But often what happens there is that different parts of the body are measured and then knots are tied to mark those measurements along a cord that is then given to the initiate or kept with the coven. And I personally like for all of my magic to have as much of a personal connection as possible. So using my own measure or some aspect of my measure within my own cords makes good sense to me. In this case, I go from my grip, which is extended, and I measure off at my right shoulder, or my opposite shoulder. This is not my right shoulder, this is my left shoulder. This is my right hand. So, and I know that this is about a yard because I've measured it before. And I will take that times 3, which I've already done, and cut it off there. So that is my standard length that I make cords. Since different parts of the body have different magical or spiritual connections according to different cultural traditions, you may want to use a different part of your body for the measure. For instance, you might want to use your leg or around your waist or around your hips. You can choose the part that makes the most sense to you. I like this measure because it has associations with sovereignty and action and will, and it puts me in mind of both a royal scepter and shooting a bow and arrow. My suggestion here is that whatever part you choose to take your measure, make it make sense to you. Have a reason for it. This is also, by the way, when people ask me how long should the cords be, that I give such like fuzzy answers because that depends on you. Tip number 4, colors mean stuff. Color magic is definitely like 100% at play within cord magic. That being said, I really hate the lists of color correspondences that just sort of get perpetuated and regurgitated in witchy tip instas, in Pinterest, and in books that are marketed toward witches. Those same lists have been posted and reposted and re-reposted without considering their sources or the cultural context from which they sprouted. And I'm not saying that they're invalid necessarily. I'm just saying that they're one sort of magical cultural context that's often perpetuated without giving the practitioner any sort of understanding of where those correspondences came from. And they represent just one paradigm. So just for your information, those come out of the Western esoteric tradition, and which pretty much links everything in these correspondence tables to the 7 ruling planets of classical mythology and magic. It's a nice, neat system, like neatly encapsulated system. It has a lot of history, and I'm not knocking it. I'm just saying that it is one way, and it is not the only way. Hoodoo color associations can be quite different, as just one example. And you may find that if you like poke at your own color associations, that you may have radically different thoughts and reactions, like visceral reactions to what colors mean than what are listed in those color correspondences. And I am a huge fan of personalized correspondences because they tap deeply into our own personal magical paradigm, which then makes sort of the language of our magic, the language, the visual language, textural language of our rituals much more effective for connecting our brains to the work that we're doing. For more on that, check out this video on creating your own correspondences. Number 5, keep it simple, sweetie. The method I use almost exclusively is a simple 3-strand braid with knots. Can you do fancier braids? Sure. Can you do one that's nothing but knots, like those friendship bracelets? Absolutely. Can you? I'm gonna stop you right there. You can do whatever you want. There is no witchcraft police that's gonna come in and tell you that you have laddered wrong. I do, and I'm walking you through a practice of a very simple braid with knots that are tied after the braid is completed, because I have found this to be the most effective method for both myself and the vast majority of my craft students. Why is it so effective? Well, I think that it's because it demands some of your concentration so that you stay focused on your intent and present within the work. But at the same time, it allows you to develop enough of a rhythm to get a little trancy and energy raising as you work. So I end up looking for those features when I change up my cord or ladder game as well. Like for instance, when I make beaded and knotted ladders. Like these. These other types of ladders are also pretty simple in their design. And I use them for particularly for meditational ladders, most especially. And if there's interest, I could do another video on how to do this kind of ladder and what you would want to be looking for and some tips and tricks on how to make that work. Tip number 6 is to know your knots. No, not in the sense of like a sailor, a scout, or a survivalist. We don't need to know that many different types of knots necessarily. More like know where and when you're going to tie your knots. Aside from the top knot that holds the threads together and allows you a base to get started with your braiding, I strongly suggest refraining against knotting again until the braid is fully woven. That will actually allow you to weave the pieces of intention together and to tie in the power, or the power of the spirits, if you're calling on spirits or deities to empower the work, with focus. when you're actually making those knots. Most of your knots are going to be overhand knots that look like this. But what about that first one? It could be just a simple overhand knot as well, or it could be something else, like a loop with an overhand knot. If it is a loop or something different, what does that signify within the work that you're doing? And what about the knot at the end? Like, don't forget that as you're braiding and you come to the end, there's a knot there that's going to hold the braid together. That is also a knot that you are tying. So the first knot is at one end always, and the second knot is at the other end always, just to get the braid started and finished and held together in place. And that's one of the reasons why then we switch from side to side. A lot of times, like we'll go middle and then side, 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 side for the other knots that we do, is because we're already doing this alternating from sort of top to bottom or right to left, left to right. So remember that each knot signifies something. It could be the same something that's being reiterated, or it could be different somethings, but you need to be clear on what that is. You need to plan that out ahead of time. And remember that you are tying power into these knots. Your power, the power of a spirit or a deity that's assisting you with the work. So you need to tie those knots with intention and clarity. So I'll give the example that within the Spiral Castle tradition, which is taught within the Red Thread Academy, the first knot is always a loop or a noose that represents the white goddess. The second knot, which is at the end of the braid, always has a tail or a flail, which represents the black goddess, Kolyo. And then we tie a knot in the middle, which is the cane knot. So these three knots are always present. These three powers are always present within our seasonal cords and within our initiation cords. So tip number 7 is to keep it neat. There are a couple of different ways to avoid becoming Jeremy the Crow while you're braiding. You can use something to stabilize the starting end of the braid, a clipboard, a big toe, which I am told that in some African traditional religions or African diasporic religions relates to the ancestors. So I like that connotation. I was using my big toe anyway. A tool like a staff or a stang, or a friend if you're lucky enough to have somebody who will just hold the other end for you. The best friend for this type of work is somebody who is already working in alignment with the magic that you're trying to do and is of a mind on the work. Maybe you hold their end while they braid, and then later they hold your end while you braid. You can also use a set of devices to bundle up the threads to keep them from getting tangled as you work. Binder clips work pretty well. Kumihimo bobbins also work great. Thanks, Dennis and Saren, for the tip on that one. You can also just let the strands hang loose, but then pull a strand out every so often to loosen and release the wonky counter braid that's happening in the upside down while you work. Tip number 8, keep it tight, but don't hurt yourself. If you're unaccustomed to braiding, it may actually take a while to get the hang of it. Like I said, my trad uses a lot of braids, so we get a lot of practice. You don't want your braid to be really loose, just like you wouldn't want the weave on a piece of cloth to be really loose where you can like see daylight through it. But if you have arthritis or some other condition that affects your grip and your dexterity, or if you just go at the work with like a death grip, trying to make it as tight as a tiger, you may be adding additional pain into the working that might not be part of your intention at all. Then again, if that pain was part of your intention, go for it. Cramp those claws. Tip number 9, work that weaver magic. Let yourself get into the flow and the rhythm of what's actually happening with the braid if you can, when you can. And when knots and tangles happen, and they will, recognize them as a part of the process and not something to fight against and be frustrated by and to be a source of anger or irritation. This type of magic taps into the power of all of those weavers of fate and magic. Arachne, Athena, the Moirai, or the Fates, Frau Hulda, Frigga, the Norns, Circe, Calypso, Rumpelstiltskin, Brigantia, and Elaine of Astolat, just to name several, actually. And you, by doing this kind of magic, you are proclaiming yourself among them, a weaver of fate, a weaver of magic. So, a little bonus for you. If you need help learning how to do a basic braid, here's how I do it. You're going to divide your yarn or your threads into 3 different strands or shanks. It'll be shanks if there's multiple threads that are together. I use my middle and ring fingers to hold the left and right shanks, and my thumbs and index fingers to pick the center thread or shank and to switch it with the ones on the left and right in an alternating pattern. So you're going to alternate switching the left to the center and the right to the center. So right, center, left, center, right, center, left, center. Each time you switch one of the sides, your fingers are going to have to switch their grip on those shanks. It takes some practice at first, but if you go slow, you'll build up the muscle memory. Remember that practice makes permanent, so it is better to be slow and accurate until your fingers have picked up the habit. And that's all that I have to say about that for today. I invite you to share your tips for making witches' ladders down in the comments below. And I hope that you found today's chat useful, encouraging, or thought-provoking. And if so, please bless me with the magic of the like button and tell your witchy friends that there is good stuff happening here at Blade and Broom. And also, if you would like to learn more about the Red Thread Academy and the witchcraft that I practice, you can check out the Red Thread Academy on Etsy. Or if you're interested in just keeping up with my witchy shenanigans and projects, then get a free account for the Thread app and check out the news and notes for freebies. I'll see you back here next week for more witchy goodness. Bye, friends.
Here come I to